There is a moment, quiet, internal, almost invisible, where everything changes. Not because you spoke louder, not because you demanded respect, not because you proved your worth to anyone, but because something inside you clicked. You stopped negotiating your value. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped chasing recognition from people who never intended to give it. And in that moment, your energy shifted. People may not understand what changed, but they feel it. Because energy never lies. Most people spend their lives asking a silent question. Am I enough? They look for the answer in approval, in attention, in being needed. They give more, tolerate more, accept less, hoping that one day someone will finally choose them. But here's the truth most people in America never hear. Oh, the more you chase validation, the less valuable you appear. Not because you lack worth, but because value is defined by boundaries. And that brings us to the first shift that changes how people treat you. Withdraw unearned access. There comes a point where self-respect demands honesty. Your time is valuable. Your energy is valuable. Your presence is valuable. Yet many people give these things away without hesitation. They answer every call, reply to every message, show up even when they're exhausted, stay available out of fear of being forgotten, replaced, or disliked. But constant availability does not create respect. It creates familiarity, and familiarity without boundaries breeds entitlement. What is given freely, endlessly, without limits, is rarely appreciated. When you continue showing up for people who show up inconsistently, you teach them something dangerous, that you are optional, not because they are bad people, but because human nature responds to standards. Every time you excuse disrespect, every time you overextend, every time you stay silent to keep peace, you communicate a message without words. My boundaries are flexible. My needs come second. My energy is cheap, and people treat you accordingly. But the shift happens when you stop, calmly, quietly, without anger. You don't announce it. You don't explain it. You don't create drama. You simply step back. You stop answering immediately. You stop saying yes out of guilt. You stop carrying emotional weight that was never yours to carry. And something interesting happens. People notice. Not because you said anything, but because your absence speaks louder than your presence ever did. Your silence forces awareness. You are no longer accessible on demand. No longer emotionally available to chaos. No longer reachable for manipulation disguised as need. And for the first time, people feel what they took for granted. Here's a hard truth. People don't value what you explain. They value what they can lose. When you stop proving loyalty, stop chasing understanding, stop investing where effort is one-sided, you reclaim your power. You become selective, unavailable to confusion, detached from half-effort, uninterested in connections that drain instead of build. This isn't punishment. This is alignment. And alignment changes your environment. When you stop pouring into people who drain you, you create space. Space for respect, for balance, for people who meet you where you stand. Self-respect acts like a filter. Some people will rise to your standard. Others will fade away. Both outcomes are necessary. Some will say, "You've changed." Let them. Anyone who benefited from your lack of boundaries will feel uncomfortable when you grow. That discomfort is not your responsibility. You are not responsible for managing other people's reactions. You are responsible for protecting your peace. From this moment forward, your availability is not assumed. It is earned. Your energy is not public property. It is sacred. You don't need to explain why you pulled back. You don't need to justify your distance. People who respect you will understand without words. People who don't, never intended to. This is where power begins. Not in control, not in dominance, but in self-certainty. When you know your worth, you don't chase, you choose. And the world responds accordingly. That is the shift. That is the power. There is a level of power that has nothing to do with dominance, arguments, or being the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to those who are aware. In a world addicted to noise, explaining, defending, reacting, the person who speaks less automatically rises above the chaos. Silence is not weakness. Silence is control. Most people talk too much because they are uncomfortable with stillness. They rush to fill gaps. They over-explain to feel understood. They react emotionally to feel validated. But when you learn to speak less, something shifts inside you. You stop reacting. You start responding. And there is a massive difference. When you speak less, your mind slows down. Your emotions settle. Your perception sharpens. You stop hearing just words. You begin to notice tone. You stop believing promises. You start watching patterns. You stop being impressed by performance. You start reading energy. Because here's the truth. The words are easy to control. Energy is not. Anyone can say the right thing. Few can sustain the right behavior. And silence gives you the space to observe the difference. When you stop rushing to speak, people reveal themselves. Always. They reveal how they act when they think you're secured. They reveal how consistent they are when attention fades. They reveal whether their respect is real and or conditional. Most people miss this because they're busy performing, trying to be liked, trying to belong, trying to prove their value. But the moment you step back and simply observe, you realize how much noise you used to tolerate. You notice manipulation hidden behind charm. You notice inconsistency dressed as confusion. You notice disrespect masked as honesty. And instead of confronting everything, you choose. That's where your power lives. Silence doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you're deciding if it's worth saying. You stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop explaining boundaries to those who benefit from crossing them. You stop defending your peace. You just watch and decide. While others exhaust themselves trying to be impressive, you are gathering information. While others talk to be seen, you are reading the room. And people feel that shift. Because there is something intimidating about someone who doesn't rush to speak. Someone who listens fully. Someone who pauses before responding. Someone who isn't emotionally reactive. That composure creates gravity. Those who speak too much often reveal insecurity. Those who over-explain often fear being exposed. Those who demand attention often lack inner stability. But when you speak less, every word you do say gains weight. Your pauses command respect. Your silence forces reflection. People begin to listen, not because you're loud, but because you're intentional. Mystery creates magnetism, not the kind rooted in games or manipulation, but the kind born from self-control. You become unreadable, not cold but centered, unpredictable, not chaotic but aware. And that awareness makes manipulation difficult, because manipulation feeds on emotional reaction. When you don't react instantly, when you don't explain impulsively, when you don't defend unnecessarily, control shifts back to you. The less you speak, the more you hear. The more you hear, the more you learn. And the more you learn, the harder you are to deceive. This is why silence is discipline. It takes strength to pause when triggered. It takes confidence to listen without interrupting. It takes self-respect to let people talk themselves into revealing who they really are. Silence creates clarity. You stop making decisions based on emotion. You stop trusting words over behavior. You stop getting pulled into unnecessary drama. Instead, you move strategically. You choose when to engage. You choose when to respond. You choose when to walk away. And that choice is power. In America, people are conditioned to talk, to pitch themselves, defend themselves, justify themselves. But the people who rise the highest understand something different. Not everything deserves a response. Some things deserve distance. Some situations deserve observation. Some people deserve silence. When you master this, you stop being predictable. You are no longer easy to read, no longer easy to manipulate, no longer easy to disrespect. Your presence alone shifts the dynamic, because silence backed by self-respect is loud, and awareness backed by discipline is dangerous, in the best way. This is not about being quiet to seem mysterious. This is about being quiet because you are secure, secure enough to listen, secure enough to wait, secure enough to decide, instead of react. Speak less. Observe more. That is how you move from emotional to intentional. That is how you protect your energy. That is how you gain control without force. Before the world takes you seriously. Before people value your presence. Before respect becomes automatic, and there is one place where everything is decided: in private. Not in public wins. Not in applause. Not in recognition. But in the quiet moments when no one is watching. That is where self-respect is built. Most people try to command respect externally, through image, words, or validation. But respect doesn't start outside. It starts with how you treat yourself when there is no audience. What you allow in private eventually shows in public. Your habits, your self-talk, your discipline, or lack of it, they all leak into your energy. And people feel it, even if they can't explain it. Respecting yourself in private means making decisions that align with your future, not your comfort. It means choosing discipline over delay, growth over distraction, integrity over impulse. It means doing what needs to be done even when motivation disappears. Because motivation is temporary. Discipline is identity. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, your confidence grows quietly. Every time you break one, it weakens, silently. And the world responds accordingly. How you speak to yourself after failure matters more than how others speak to you. Do you attack yourself? Or do you adjust and rebuild? Because here's the truth. The way you recover from setbacks defines your self-respect. People who lack self-respect punish themselves for mistakes. People with self-respect correct themselves, without cruelty. Private self-respect also means setting standards for your thoughts. You don't entertain self-doubt for too long. You don't allow negative loops to run unchecked. You don't live in excuses. You observe your mind and you train it. Because your mind is either a weapon or a liability, and most people let it run wild. The world only mirrors what you project internally. If you doubt yourself behind closed doors, that doubt shows in your posture, your tone, your decisions. You might not say it out loud, but people sense it. You are always communicating your worth, even in silence. Respecting yourself in private means walking away from what drains you, even when no one will ever know the sacrifice you made. It means leaving conversations, habits, and environments that weaken you, not for revenge, not to prove a point, but to preserve your peace. External validation will never fix internal neglect. No amount of praise can replace self-belief. No amount of attention can heal self-abandonment. You don't need more approval. You need alignment. You don't need more followers. You need more self-trust. Self-trust is built when your actions match your words, especially when it's inconvenient. When you stop betraying yourself for comfort. When you stop abandoning your values to fit in. When you stop choosing short-term relief over long-term strength. That's when something shifts. Your boundaries strengthen. Your energy stabilizes. Your standards rise naturally. You no longer need to demand respect. It becomes the default. And here's the part many people resist. When you respect yourself in private, your life begins to reorganize itself. Some people adjust to your growth. Some people fade away. Both are signs of progress. People who benefited from your self-neglect will feel uncomfortable when you stop abandoning yourself. They may label you distant, cold, changed. Let them. Outgrowing people is not betrayal. Outgrowing yourself is. Self-respect in private also means being honest with yourself. No excuses, no illusions. You stop lying about what you tolerate. You stop justifying what drains you. You stop pretending you're okay when you're not. Because clarity is respect, and clarity leads to control. The strongest people are not the loudest. They are the most consistent quick and privately. They train when no one is watching. They think before speaking. They choose discipline even when it feels lonely. And that quiet discipline becomes visible over time, in your presence, in your confidence, in the way people respond to you. Respecting yourself in private is not glamorous. It's uncomfortable. It's lonely at times. It requires sacrifice. But it is the foundation of everything you want. Because once you stop betraying yourself, the world has no choice but to adjust. This is where real power is built, not in attention, not in approval, but in alignment. Everything in your life reflects what you tolerate. Your relationships, your opportunities, your emotional state. None of it is random. It is filtered through one invisible force. Your standard. Your standard is not what you say you want. It is what you allow. And for a long time, many people allow chaos because they mistake it for normal. Low standards feel familiar. Confusion feels acceptable. Disrespect feels manageable. Until one day it doesn't. The moment you raise your standard, clarity enters your life. Not chaos, clarity. Because high standards eliminate what doesn't align. This isn't arrogance. This isn't ego. This is self-respect in action. The moment you decide you are no longer available for what dishonors you, internally or externally, and reality begins to shift. People either rise to meet you or fall away. Both outcomes are necessary. High standards make you rare, and rare things are often misunderstood. You will be called difficult, intense, too much. Let them talk. The right people will never be threatened by your standards. They will respect them. Stop apologizing for your expectations. Stop shrinking to keep peace. Peace that requires self-betrayal is not peace. It's avoidance. Protect your standard, especially when loneliness tests you. Because loneliness will tempt you to compromise, to lower your expectations, to accept less, to return to what you already outgrew. But every time you lower your standard, you weaken your foundation, and rebuilding it costs more than protecting it. Your standard is your filter. It determines who has access to your life, who stays, who leaves. Now comes the final shift, the one that seals everything. Walk away without drama. There is immense power in leaving quietly. No speeches, no emotional messages, no explanations. Not because you're afraid, but because you're clear. True closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from alignment. When you walk away calmly, you show that your self-respect no longer needs validation. Your absence becomes the message, and silence leaves an echo. That echo is often louder than words. Walking away without drama isn't cold. It's controlled. It means you no longer need to prove your point. You no longer need to be understood. You no longer need to win. You just move on. Not every battle deserves your energy. Not every person deserves access. Not every ending requires an explanation. Some doors close because they no longer lead anywhere. And the strongest move is to close them peacefully. In America, people are taught to react, to confront, to argue, to demand closure. But power operates differently. Power is selective. You don't attend every argument. You don't explain every boundary. You don't chase resolution from people who lack awareness. You choose peace, and peace backed by self-respect is authority. When you set the standard, respect yourself in private. Observe more than you speak. Withdraw unearned access, and walk away without drama. Your life changes, not overnight, but permanently. Because you are no longer living from reaction. You are living from alignment. You don't need to control people. You don't need to convince anyone. Your energy does the work, and the right people feel it. The wrong people remove themselves. That is not loss. That is order. This is how everything changes. Not by force, not by noise, but by quiet, disciplined power. At this point, you're no longer reacting. You're no longer chasing. You're no longer emotionally dependent. You're stable. And stability creates space for something more dangerous than confidence: competence. Because here's the truth most people avoid. Respect lasts longer when it's backed by value. You can have boundaries. You can have standards. You can have emotional control. But if you're easily replaceable, people will still test you. Not out of cruelty, but out of reality. The world doesn't reward intention. It rewards usefulness. So the next shift is not emotional. It's structural. You stop focusing on being liked and start focusing on becoming rare. Becoming hard to replace doesn't mean working harder. It means working smarter. It means developing skills that solve real problems. In America, value is measured by one thing. How difficult are you to ignore? When you bring something to the table that others can't, your presence changes the room. You're no longer competing on personality. You're competing on impact. And impact speaks louder than words. Most people stay average because they spread themselves thin. A little effort everywhere. No mastery anywhere. But mastery creates leverage. When you choose one skill, one lane, and go deep, you separate yourself from the noise. You stop being replaceable because specialists are remembered. Generalists are forgotten. Becoming hard to replace also means discipline. Talent without discipline fades. Skill without consistency disappears. The people who win are not the most gifted. They're the most consistent. They show up even when no one is watching. They refine when others relax. They build when others complain. And over time, that quiet consistency compounds. People may not notice at first, but one day they do. And when they do, it's too late to ignore you. Another part of being hard to replace is reliability. In a world full of excuses, reliability is rare. Do what you say you'll do. Show up when you commit. Deliver without drama. That alone separates you from 90% of people. Not because you're extraordinary, but because others are inconsistent. Your identity becomes your reputation, and reputation moves faster than explanation. Becoming hard to replace also requires eliminating distractions. You can't build value while being constantly interrupted. Attention is currency. Where you place it determines who you become. You stop consuming mindlessly. You stop chasing trends. You stop wasting time proving things online. You build quietly. Because real power doesn't announce itself. It prepares. And preparation creates confidence that doesn't shake. This is where your standards become non-negotiable. You protect your time. You protect your focus. You protect your energy. Not because you're arrogant, but because your work demands it. People start adjusting to you. They respect your boundaries because your value is clear. And here's the shift. You stop asking for opportunities. Opportunities begin to find you. Not because you chased them, but because your competence made you visible. This doesn't happen overnight, but it always happens eventually. When value is real, when discipline is consistent, when identity is aligned, being hard to replace doesn't mean you're untouchable. It means your absence is felt. Your contribution matters. Your presence adds weight, and that's when power becomes undeniable. Not loud, not forced, but earned. At this level, you don't need to threaten. You don't need to explain. You don't need to compete. Your work speaks. Your standards hold. Your calm remains. And people adjust because they have to. This is not ego. This is self-respect backed by execution. And this is how you move from internal power to external impact. At this level, something subtle but powerful has already changed. You have standards. You have control over your emotions. You've built value that doesn't need approval. So now comes a final internal shift. You stop explaining yourself, not because you're arrogant, not because you're closed off, but because clarity has replaced insecurity. Most people explain themselves because they want to be understood. They fear being misjudged. They fear being disliked. They fear being seen incorrectly. So they overtalk. They justify decisions. They defend boundaries. And in doing so, they give away power. Because explanation is often a form of seeking permission. When you constantly explain, you communicate doubt. You signal that your decisions are open for debate. But when you stop explaining, something changes. Your actions become the message. And actions don't argue. They stand. Stopping explanation doesn't mean becoming silent about everything. It means you become selective. You explain to those who deserve clarity, not to those who demand control. You stop answering questions that are really disguised objections. You stop defending choices that don't harm anyone. You stop justifying growth to people committed to staying small. And that is where authority forms. In America, people are trained to justify themselves. At work, in relationships, online. But the people who lead don't explain every move. They decide and move. They understand something most people don't. The more solid your foundation, the less explanation you need. People who trust themselves don't need constant validation. They don't need to convince others. They let time and results speak. Stopping explanation also protects your energy. Every explanation invites opinion. Every opinion invites debate. Every debate invites doubt, and doubt drains focus. When you stop explaining, you stop leaking energy. You keep your plans private. You move quietly. You execute without announcing. Because not everyone needs access to your process. Some people only deserve access to results. This doesn't make you secretive. It makes you strategic. There is power in moving without noise, without commentary, without justification. Because when people don't know your next move, they can't interfere with it. This is why silence often feels uncomfortable to others. They are used to access, used to updates, used to explanations. And when that access disappears, they feel unsettled. But that discomfort is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is alignment. Stopping explanation also strengthens your identity. You stop outsourcing your confidence. You stop checking reactions to measure your worth. You stop adjusting yourself to be palatable. And in doing so, you become solid, unshakable, because your decisions come from clarity, not consensus. People will have opinions. Let them. Opinions don't pay your bills. They don't carry your consequences. They don't live your life. You do. When you stop explaining, you also stop overcorrecting. You allow people to misunderstand you, not because you don't care, but because you trust the truth to surface over time. Those who know you and know you. Those who don't were never meant to. This level of detachment is maturity. It's the ability to move forward without dragging everyone with you. It's the understanding that not everyone deserves a seat at your table, and that's okay. You are no longer proving anything. You are building. Quietly, relentlessly, with intention. Stopping explanation completes the shift. You withdraw access. You observe more than you speak. You respect yourself in private. You raise your standards. You detach emotionally. You become hard to replace. Now you move without permission, without noise, without apology. And that is where real authority lives. At this point, you don't need to prove anything. You've already shifted internally. You've already raised your standards. You've already learned when to speak and when to stay silent. Now comes the final mastery. You move in silence, not because you're hiding, but because you're focused. Most people announce their plans to feel important. They talk before they build. They explain before they execute. But power doesn't broadcast. Power prepares. When you move in silence, you protect your momentum. You protect your energy. You protect your vision from unnecessary opinions. Because not everyone who listens supports you. And not everyone who supports you needs updates. Silence keeps your work clean. You stop seeking external motivation. You stop feeding off attention. You let discipline do the talking. And slowly, quietly, results start forming. That's when everything changes. Not overnight, Not dramatically, but undeniably. People notice the shift, not because you told them, but because your presence feels different. You're calmer, more grounded, less reactive. Your confidence isn't loud, it's stable. And stability commands respect. Winning loud doesn't mean bragging. It means letting outcomes speak. It means letting your growth become visible without explanation. People who doubted you will notice. People who underestimated you will feel it. People who benefited from your old version will miss it. But you don't pause to explain. You keep moving. Because at this level, you understand something deeply. You don't need to be understood to be effective. You don't need validation to be aligned. You don't need approval to be powerful. You've learned to withdraw access, to observe more than you speak, to respect yourself in private, to set standards without apology, to detach emotionally, to become hard to replace, to stop explaining yourself. And now you live it, quietly, intentionally. This isn't the end. This is the foundation. From here, everything you build stands stronger. Your relationships become cleaner. Your decisions become sharper. Your life becomes intentional. And the world adjusts, not because you demanded it, but because you became someone it had to respect. Move in silence. Let your discipline speak. Let your consistency speak. Let your results speak. And when you win, you won't need to say a word.